1957 saw Hollywood at a crossroads as television stole audiences and the studio system crumbled. While classics like The Bridge on the River Kwai triumphed, financial catastrophes lurked behind the glamour. Today, we're exploring cinema's shadows to uncover spectacular box office failures that burned through millions. Let's dive straight into it and talk about the 13 biggest box office disasters from 1957 that Hollywood executives would rather you forget. Republic Pictures released this forgettable romantic comedy starring John Lund and television actress Dora Singleton in February 1957. The film told the story of a PR man sent to Reno to prevent a wealthy heiress from marrying a fortune-hunting gambler. What makes this disaster notable is how completely it has vanished from cinema history. Even by 1957 standards, it was considered painfully formulaic. One reviewer described it as having the style of a weak TV sitcom with an excruciatingly bad stock music score. Despite running a brief 75 minutes, audiences found the film leaden and dull. It became one of Republic Pictures' least successful productions and has never received a proper home video release. The timing couldn't have been worse, as Republic was already struggling financially against larger studios with bigger stars and production values. The failure contributed to Republic Pictures' financial struggles. Within 2 years, the studio would cease film production entirely. Its ultimate Hollywood fate, being neither hated nor loved, just completely forgotten. Not even the film's Nevada gambling setting could provide enough intrigue to save this bland production from box office disaster. When producers assembled the Monte Carlo story, they thought they had a guaranteed hit. The film starred Marlene Dietrich opposite Italian actor-director Vittorio De Sica in a romantic comedy set against Monaco's famous casinos. The timing seemed perfect. Monaco had just become a global sensation following Grace Kelly's fairy tale wedding to Prince Rainier in 1956. The film was shot on location, showcasing the playground of the rich in stunning technorama, an expensive new widescreen process. Despite its prestigious cast and gorgeous scenery, audiences stayed away. Critics found the characters unsympathetic. One review questioned why on earth Marlene Dietrich got involved in this nonsense, suggesting she must have been short of cash. The lavish costumes and opulent settings couldn't mask what many called a tedious and predictable plot about two broke gamblers pretending to be wealthy. The production costs were enormous. United Artists had invested heavily in the technorama process and location shooting, but the film failed to recoup its budget. Today, it's mainly remembered as a footnote in Dietrich's filmography, often ranked as one of her darkest hours. Even Dietrich's memorable rendition of Back Home Again in Indiana couldn't salvage this expensive European misadventure. MGM's Something of Value tackled the politically charged Mau Mau uprising in Kenya with two major stars, Rock Hudson and Sidney Poitier, playing childhood friends on opposite sides of the conflict. Based on Robert Rourke's best-selling novel, it was directed by Richard Brooks, who had previously scored a hit with Blackboard Jungle. Despite the star power, the film became a significant financial disappointment. MGM Records revealed a net loss of $410,000, about $4.2 million today, despite earning $3.6 million globally. The film's unflinching portrayal of violence was shocking for 1957 audiences, with scenes of brutality on both sides of the colonial conflict proving too disturbing for many viewers. The film's troubles stemmed partly from its controversial subject matter. Many found it uncomfortably political for 1957. Some theaters in the American South refused to book the film entirely due to its racial themes and Poitier's prominence. The marketing campaign also struggled to position the film. Was it a drama about racial inequality, a war film, or a friendship story? Critics were divided. Many praised Poitier but criticized Hudson as terribly miscast with a distracting American accent in a role that clearly called for a British one. After its poor performance, MGM reissued it in 1962 as Africa Ablaze, but the film faded into obscurity. This commercial failure indicated how unprepared mainstream Hollywood was to handle complex colonial and racial narratives at this historical moment. When MGM assembled Until They Sail, they spared no expense on star power. This drama about New Zealand women during World War II featured Gene Simmons, Paul Newman, Joan Fontaine, and Piper Laurie, a cast that should have guaranteed success. Based on a story by James A. Meichener and directed by Robert Wise, who would later direct West Side Story, The film had impressive credentials. Newman was rising to prominence, and Simmons was considered one of Hollywood's most talented actresses. The screenplay focused on four sisters whose relationships with American soldiers stationed in New Zealand create both romance and scandal during wartime. Despite these advantages, Until They Sail became one of MGM's most significant financial disasters of 1957. Studio records revealed the film lost over $1 million. Critics found the story melodramatic and the portrayal of New Zealand unconvincing. The film's somber black and white cinematography, while artistically appropriate, may have seemed outdated at a time when colorful spectacles were drawing audiences. The movie's commercial failure was particularly shocking given its pedigree. What makes this disaster fascinating is how thoroughly it has vanished from popular memory despite its star-studded cast. It stands as a reminder that even perfect ingredients on paper can still produce a commercial failure. Even the film's poignant Franz Waxman score couldn't save this wartime romance from box office oblivion. Monkey on My Back told the harrowing true story of boxing champion Barney Ross and his struggle with drug addiction, a subject too controversial for 1957 audiences. Starring Cameron Mitchell as Ross, the film attempted to tackle addiction with unprecedented frankness. United Artists hoped the biographical sports drama would capitalize on interest in boxing films and social problem pictures. However, the film ran into immediate trouble with censors. The Production Code Administration objected to scenes showing drug use, forcing numerous cuts. The Catholic Legion of Decency rated it morally objectionable in part, limiting its commercial prospects. The original, more impactful scenes showing withdrawal symptoms and drug cravings were reportedly so disturbing that preview audiences walked out. The film also suffered from Mitchell's lack of star power compared to contemporaries like Brando or Newman. Critics recognized the film's ambitions but found the execution lacking. Variety praised its hard-hitting approach but noted the film was sometimes awkward in its narrative due to the many censorship-mandated cuts. The poor performance highlighted Hollywood's difficulty addressing adult themes within production code constraints. While The Man with the Golden Arm had successfully tackled addiction earlier with Frank Sinatra, Monkey on My Back lacked such advantages and quietly disappeared from theaters. Its box office failure reinforced studio executives' fears about tackling controversial subjects like drug addiction. Warner Brothers had every reason to expect success from Band of Angels. The Civil War drama starred Clark Gable, still a major draw after Gone with the Wind, alongside Yvonne de Carlo and Sidney Poitier. Behind the camera was legendary director Raoul Walsh, responsible for classics like High Sierra. Based on Robert Penn Warren's novel, the production received a substantial budget. The studio positioned it as a prestigious literary adaptation, hoping to recapture Gone with the Wind magic. The studio invested heavily in elaborate plantation sets, period costumes, and Mississippi River steamboat sequences that drove the budget ever higher. But Band of Angels became one of Warner Brothers' costliest mistakes of 1957. Audiences found the story of a woman who discovers she has black ancestry and is sold into slavery, both melodramatic and uncomfortable. Critics were harsh, with the New York Times calling it a lushly absurd film drama. Many reviewers pointed out that the film awkwardly attempted to blend romantic fantasy with the harsh realities of American slavery. Production costs spiraled as Walsh insisted on elaborate sets. Gable, in his mid-50s, appeared tired and uninspired. Most damagingly, the film's handling of racial issues seemed outdated even in 1957. Today, it has faded into obscurity despite its once famous cast. The ultimate fate of a true box office disaster. The film's failure permanently damaged Gable's box office standing in his final years before his death in 1960. On paper, Designing Woman had everything going for it. Gregory Peck and Lauren Bacall as the stars, Vincente Minnelli directing, and a screenplay by George Wells that would win an Academy Award. MGM positioned this romantic comedy about a sports journalist who marries a fashion designer as a sophisticated adult comedy in the Tracy Hepburn tradition. Despite these advantages, the film performed well below box office expectations. While not an outright flop, its disappointing performance was concerning given the caliber of talent and MGM's investment. The film's budget ballooned with elaborate fashion sequences, boxing scenes, and elegant Manhattan settings, making its modest returns even more problematic. Production complications included Peck stepping in last minute to replace James Stewart, who withdrew due to illness. The film also faced competition from lighter comedies that connected better with shifting late 1950s tastes. Behind-the-scenes tensions between Minnelli and Peck reportedly created an uncomfortable shooting atmosphere that may have affected the final product's quality and chemistry. Critics offered mixed reviews. The New York Times called it tediously complex and laboriously acted. Today, Designing Woman is viewed as a minor footnote rather than the classic MGM had envisioned, a surprising disappointment from a team that should have delivered a hit. Despite its glamorous depiction of New York's fashion world, featuring real couture creations and authentic locations, audiences simply weren't buying what this particular Designing Woman was selling. Universal International had high expectations for Man of a Thousand Faces, a biopic about silent film star Lon Chaney starring James Cagney. The studio invested heavily, hoping it would capitalize on nostalgia for Hollywood's golden age while showcasing Cagney's acting prowess. The film explored Chaney's remarkable ability to transform himself through makeup and his painful personal life, including his complex relationship with his deaf parents. The film received critical acclaim, particularly for Cagney's performance. Variety praised it as a fascinating, thoroughly convincing biography, and it received an Academy Award nomination for Best Screenplay. Cagney's meticulous portrayal of Chaney was considered a triumph, with the actor mastering many of the contortions and physical transformations that had made Chaney famous. Despite positive reviews, it failed to connect with general audiences. The film grossed approximately $1.5 million against a production budget of over $2 million, resulting in a significant financial loss for Universal. The black and white production may have seemed old-fashioned to audiences increasingly drawn to color spectacles. By 1957, Cagney's box office draw had diminished from his peak years. More importantly, younger audiences had little connection to Lon Chaney, whose silent films were rarely screened on television. The film's serious tone also worked against it when lighter entertainment was gaining popularity. Many who saw it praised the film's artistry but found its story of disability, family tragedy, and show business struggles too depressing. This failure contributed to Universal's financial troubles and represented a blow to Cagney's career. Shortly after, he would take a hiatus from acting that lasted nearly 5 years. Otto Preminger's adaptation of George Bernard Shaw's play St. Joan was one of 1957's most prestigious productions. The director conducted a highly publicized worldwide talent search to find an unknown actress to play Joan of Arc, eventually selecting 17-year-old Jean Seberg from 18,000 hopefuls. The nationwide search received enormous publicity, with Life magazine and major newspapers breathlessly reporting on the discovery of a new star. United Artists invested heavily in the production, confident in Preminger's track record. The marketing campaign centered on Seberg's discovery, creating enormous expectations for her debut. The studio promoted the film as a major cultural event, with special premieres and an extensive promotional tour featuring Seberg herself. The film's premiere became one of Hollywood's most notorious disasters. Critics savaged Seberg's performance, finding her inexperienced and overwhelmed. The New York Times wrote that she lacks the dynamism and spiritual fire to carry such a demanding role, while Time called her a lamb pretending to be a lion. The intellectual, dialogue-heavy Shaw script proved challenging for even experienced actors, let alone a novice from Iowa with no professional training. Audiences stayed away, making St. Joan one of United Artists' biggest failures of the decade. The film earned less than $1 million against a $2.2 million budget. The failure had lasting consequences. Preminger's reputation for discovering talent was damaged. More tragically, the brutal reception contributed to Seberg's lifelong mental health struggles. St. Joan stands as a cautionary tale about excessive hype and casting inexperienced actors in demanding roles. The film's failure also highlighted the risks in adapting highly respected literary works without sufficient commercial elements. Warner Brothers had good reason to expect success from The Pajama Game. The film was based on a Tony Award-winning Broadway musical that had run for over 1,000 performances. It starred the reliable box office draw Doris Day and retained much of the original Broadway cast and creative team, including directors George Abbott and Stanley Donen. The studio was certain the film would replicate the stage success of shows like South Pacific and Oklahoma that had translated into box office gold. The studio invested considerably, confident that the combination of Day's popularity and Broadway success would translate to ticket sales. Initial reviews were largely positive, with Variety calling it bright, brisk, and entertaining. The film included now classic songs like Steam Heat and Hernando's Hideaway, which had become hits from the stage production. Despite these advantages, The Pajama Game underperformed significantly. The film failed to recoup its production costs, making it one of Warner Brothers' financial disappointments of 1957. Audiences seemed puzzled by the film's unusual setting, a pajama factory where workers demand a 7.5-cent raise, which lacked the exotic or romantic settings of more successful musicals. The film's focus on labor relations in a pajama factory seemed less appealing to movie audiences than to Broadway theatergoers. More significantly, the film opened during a transitional period when musical tastes were shifting toward rock and roll, making the traditional Broadway score seem dated to younger viewers. The film's marketing campaign struggled to make industrial disputes and union negotiations seem romantic and entertaining. Today, The Pajama Game is considered an important document of a classic Broadway show, but its initial commercial disappointment demonstrated the challenges of transferring stage success to the screen. Irwin Allen's The Story of Mankind stands as perhaps the most bizarrely conceived major studio release of 1957. Warner Brothers allowed the producer-director to create what amounted to a fever dream of history, loosely based on Hendrik Willem van Loon's book about human civilization. The film attempted to cover everything from prehistoric cave dwellers to the atomic age in a single narrative, an ambition that proved impossible to execute coherently. The production assembled an astonishing cast including Vincent Price, Ronald Colman, Hedy Lamarr, Peter Lorre, and, in their final film appearance together, all three Marx Brothers. Other performers included Dennis Hopper, Agnes Moorehead, and Cesar Romero. This star-studded approach resulted in peculiar casting choices, such as Hedy Lamarr as Joan of Arc and the Marx Brothers as Peter Minuit and Native Americans in The Purchase of Manhattan. Allen structured the film around a celestial trial to determine whether humanity should continue existing or be destroyed by the Super H-bomb. This framing device allowed for historical vignettes from prehistoric times to the modern era, with stars in cameo roles. The hodgepodge approach created jarring tonal shifts as the film lurched from slapstick comedy with the Marx Brothers to serious dramatic scenes about Napoleon and Marie Antoinette. Critics were merciless. The New York Times called it, "as crazy as it can be, a historical mishmash that is much more painful than enlightening." Audiences agreed, making it one of Warner Brothers' biggest financial disasters. The film's incoherent script, inconsistent tone, and bizarre casting choices resulted in what many consider one of the strangest major studio releases ever made. The film's bizarre casting and peculiar execution have since gained it a cult following as an unintentional comedy rather than the sweeping historical epic Warner Brothers had envisioned. It represents the epitome of misguided ambition, attempting to cover the entirety of human history in less than 2 hours. Jet Pilot has one of the most infamous production histories in Hollywood. Produced by aviation enthusiast Howard Hughes for RKO Pictures, filming began in 1949 with John Wayne starring as an Air Force colonel who falls in love with a Russian pilot, played by Janet Leigh. Hughes spared no expense on aerial sequences, using actual military aircraft and pioneering camera techniques to capture dynamic flight scenes that were genuinely impressive for the era. What makes this film legendary wasn't its initial production, but what followed. Hughes, known for his obsessive perfectionism, refused to release it. For nearly 8 years, he demanded endless reshoots and edits. By the time Universal International finally released it in October 1957, the film had become an industry joke. During this protracted delay, Hughes reportedly kept ordering new aerial footage, obsessing over every cloud formation and plane maneuver, while the narrative portions of the film languished. The extended delay created enormous problems. The Cold War politics, fresh when shooting began, seemed simplistic and outdated by 1957. More damagingly, the aircraft featured prominently, cutting edge in 1949, were obsolete by release, making the supposedly contemporary military drama look like a period piece. The F-86 Sabres and other jets that had seemed revolutionary in 1949 had been replaced by more advanced models by 1957. Critics were harsh. The New York Times called it as synthetic as the celluloid it's printed on. Audiences largely stayed away, making the film a significant financial loss given its inflated budget from years of reshoots. The romantic subplot between Wayne and Lee, which might have seemed fresh years earlier, now felt forced and dated. The film's troubled journey contributed to the downfall of RKO Pictures, with Jet Pilot standing as one of its final productions before the studio ceased operations. It became a cautionary tale of how perfectionism and indecision could doom a project that might have succeeded with a timely release. Of all 1957's box office disasters, None was more prestigious or unexpected than The Spirit of St. Louis. Directed by Billy Wilder, starring James Stewart as Charles Lindbergh, and produced with a lavish budget by Warner Brothers, the film seemed destined for success. The subject matter, Lindbergh's historic first solo transatlantic flight, had all the elements of adventure, heroism, and triumph against the odds that typically resonated with audiences. The production spared no expense in recreating Lindbergh's historic 1927 transatlantic flight. Multiple aircraft replicas were built, elaborate special effects were employed, and extensive location shooting took place in Paris and New York. The final budget reportedly reached $6 million, an enormous sum for 1957. Scenes of Stewart alone in the cockpit for hours presented a unique narrative challenge that the production tried to solve with flashbacks and voiceover narration of Lindbergh's thoughts. Warner Brothers launched a massive marketing campaign, confident that America's beloved aviation hero, Stewart's star power, and Wilder's directorial prestige would deliver a blockbuster. Initial critical reception was positive. Time magazine hailed it as a lilting and lingering and altogether first-rate film, with special praise for Stewart's performance. Then came the box office results. The film earned only $2.6 million, less than half its production cost. The financial loss was staggering for such a prestigious production. The 30th anniversary of Lindbergh's flight coincided with the film's release, but this historical milestone failed to generate sufficient audience interest. Several factors contributed to this failure. At 135 minutes, the film struggled to maintain tension since the outcome was known. By 1957, Lindbergh's heroic image had been complicated by his controversial political views, making him less universally appealing. James Stewart, then 49, was also considered too old to play the 25-year-old Lindbergh. As Wilder later admitted, Jimmy was a wonderful actor, but by the time the engine started, he was already Social Security age. The inherent dramatic limitations of showing one man alone in a plane for most of the film proved impossible to overcome despite the filmmaker's best efforts. What can we learn from these 13 financial catastrophes that shook Hollywood in 1957? Star power alone couldn't save a weak production. Even legends like Gable, Stewart, and Dietrich found themselves in expensive failures. Timing was everything. Films like Jet Pilot missed their moment, arriving too late to capture public interest. These disasters revealed an industry in transition. The old formulas weren't working as television competed for audiences, and social attitudes were changing faster than studio executives could anticipate. In many ways, 1957's box office bombs foreshadowed the collapse of the studio system. Some forgotten films deserve rediscovery, particularly Man of a Thousand Faces with its remarkable Cagney performance. Others, like The Story of Mankind, might be better left in obscurity, but together, they tell a fascinating story about Hollywood's struggles during a pivotal year of change, reminding us that even in the dream factory, nightmares sometimes make it to the screen.